Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Chalk Talk presented by Platform. We're super excited to kick this one off as we've been going through our EDU style podcasts. To all of our teachers and coaches out there listening, a friendly reminder that you can get access to these in a variety of places, as well as lots of other great resources and content as you navigate through hybrid, remote, in-person styles of learning. To our students, if you're checking these out, if you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out to your teacher or coach, as well as us. We're always happy to start a conversation if people are interested in certain things. We're going to go ahead and kick this one off. This is Chalk Talk presented by Platform. Let's go. All right, so as we kick today's episode off with Coach Brez, we are excited to be talking about recovery. Last episode, we talked about sleep, which is kind of one little facet of recovery, and I think we'll almost build off of that conversation in some ways today. But let's, first kind of talk about what we're discussing when we talk about recovery, because I think there's a lot of parts to it, and there are a lot of different pieces that make up recovery. It's not one thing. We might think of it as one thing depending on, what we've done in the past for what we interpreted as our own recovery, but let's start really broad and then we'll start to kind of zoom in a little bit. But what are we really talking about specifically when we're talking about recovery?
Yeah, it is important to take a step back because recovery has become this sort of buzzword that means a lot of things for a lot of different people. And the unique thing is, it's a wildly important component of fitness and or training. And it does actually encapsulate and encompass a whole long spectrum of, pieces and elements. So, when people talk about it in certain ways, maybe it's cool downs or directly after exercise, what am I going to do to recover from that session? Or how am I balancing training with recovery to maximize results? Or even things as simple as, when I do this rep, how should I recover so that I'm ready for the next rep? It kind of is pervasive through all training. So it's important to kind of take a step back and discuss what recovery is and then the ways in which we can control it to some degree because it is such a big piece of the entire fitness puzzle.
Sure, and recovery almost kind of institutes the word or makes you think that you're recovering from something, be it training, be it stress, be it a workout, a game, a competition. So when we're talking about recovery, is it kind of the aftermath of an event? Multiple events? Is it something that we're doing every day no matter what? Our body's always recovering or actively doing stuff? There's kind of that, it's weird because we could be talking about it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think we can boil it down and then maybe get into the details, but we can boil it down to a simple statement of recovery is an ongoing, almost perpetual process of your body trying to basically get back to neutral. And the reason for that is the way in which fitness and training works physiologically. So it's worth kind of just, again, we won't go too deep, but discussing, what happens to your body during exercise, during and then after, so that we understand the, the concept of basically stress and recovery. Because I think most people, most kids certainly that have taken science class know the word homeostasis, right? It's that kind of balanced nature of all of the systems in an organism, aka us, that the human body wants to be in homeostasis. It wants to be balanced, from thermal regulation, aka your body temperature, hormonal balance, pH. There's just a whole spectrum of things that want to be kind of balanced, that are active. They go up, they go down, and they go up and down based on external stress. So you can think of stress as anything that is being applied to that system that throws it off its natural balance.
Sure, and so just to clarify, because I think it's important for everybody to understand that this isn't a topic just for athletes. Sometimes we connect the word recovery. Hey, you had a tough competition and it's time to recover from that. But we're talking about it in even broader terms for everyone, that it's stress and recovery, and that could be for anyone that partakes in a physical education class, a fitness class, a daily workout that they participate in.
The rigors of life, period.
Yeah. So I think that's a good just delineation that you use to just talk about. We're not talking about, you had a really tough football game, basketball game, soccer game. We're talking about your body was put under it, and it doesn't know always what it was that did it, but the fact that it's stressed out and it needs to recover.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, we won't spend time on this, but stress can be and is anything like psychosocial stress, like what you deal with on a day-to-day basis that stresses you out, like in the most colloquial sense, right? Like what makes you kind of like homework or relationships or home life. That type of stress is also a very applicable physiological phenomenon that basically throws your body off. So we're going to talk more specifically about the stress and the result of that stress that it comes through, call it exercise. Again, we've defined exercise as anything from somebody that is like, an athlete that's competing or training to compete, or somebody that's just, exercising for basic fitness, and then really any facet of daily life that, puts, any sort of that stress stimulus on your body over the course of a day.
Yeah. So probably what makes the most sense before we even get into the recovery itself, if you will, is to describe probably some of the things that happen when our body goes under stress. Do we lose certain things? Do we damage certain things? What are some of like the key things that are happening within our body that would happen because of stress that are probably, to your point, breaking ourselves out of that homeostasis, kind of losing that equilibrium of sorts that our body then is, maybe feeling a little out of whack, if you will.
Right. Well, when we exercise, a lot of things happen in the negative sense internally. And, first and foremost, there is skeletal muscle damage. When you ask your muscles to do things that they aren't, completely prepared for, if it's not what you can do every day over and over and over again, if it's something outside of that comfort zone, there will be perturbations in the muscle fibers themselves. You'll have damage within the muscle tissue, connective tissue, that will lead to inflammation and will need to be repaired. On top of that, very easily, when you exercise, when you do anything of, significant intensity, you are going to deplete all of your energy stores, all of your readily available ones anyway, like, blood glucose and glycogen and all of the things that fuel activity throughout the day, which you'll need to replenish. And then we've talked about in a number of other conversations about, our metabolic pathways, how we create energy to facilitate that activity. And the byproducts of those processes are very real, and we can kind of consider them as metabolic waste that accumulates during activity and needs to be cleaned out, recycled, and moved elsewhere, cleaned out, and that is yet another kind of element of stress that has been put into the systems of your body that throws it off its homeostasis, and then it needs to kind of get itself back to neutral. But that sounds, I think it sounds all very like, oh, then why would we exercise? Why don't I just sit on the couch? But it's important to remember that the human body was designed to tackle stress, right? Like we either adapt or die. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean it in the sense of like evolution, right? Yeah. We stressed our bodies, or stress was placed upon us, and our bodies were either going to adapt to handle said stress, or they wouldn't be able to. And then your genealogical line was basically screwed.
Sure.
And then, again, just, intense exercise, aerobic, anaerobic, strength, team-based sports, you're going to have dehydration, depletion of glycogen, soft tissue damage. This is all going to throw off your nervous system, cardiovascular system, thermoregulatory systems, all of the things, including your immune system, that want to be at homeostasis. But anytime we do that, and we follow with proper recovery, a period of proper recovery, we incite adaptation that is beneficial to health, performance, and a number of other avenues in which we are kind of seeking to improve, right? So it's the way we're supposed to work. It's the way we're wired, and it's why it's so important.
Yeah, and I think in the context of this conversation, what we're going to get to and are already sort of tapping into is that a lot of times we look at like that block of fitness, like that hour of our day or however much time we carve out for exercise, or where we stress our bodies as like the checkbox of being in good health and wellness, where I think today we'll sort of encapsulate what happens in the other 23, 22 hours of the day that play a part in that work in conjunction so that when you do get to that hour, you can continue to perform the day after and the day after and the day after because of all the other things around that time of stress that you need to do to recover.
Yeah, and nothing can hammer home the importance of recovery and its role in everything, your mental health, your physical health, and your performance. Then there's a quote I really like where it's a hard workout only creates the potential for fitness. It's realized when you recover afterwards. So you've probably heard similar ones, gains are made when you sleep, or gains are made in the kitchen, or whatever, kind of cliche you've heard. It's absolutely true. You can work out very hard. You can stress your body all day with manual labor and a very, grueling job. And all of those things have the potential to be beneficial kind of drives towards adaptation and improvement, but only if we allow ourselves to recover appropriately after, that period of stress. Because if you do not, right, we'll talk about how to kind of help yourself recover. But if you do not recover, what you'll do is basically accumulate a level of stress, fatigue, damage, whatever you want to call it, that can lead to things like overtraining. And that's not just a term that we need to know with regards to athletic performance training. It's we all know, like at the end of a week, if we haven't done the things that put ourselves back to neutral on a daily basis, we're burnt out.
Yeah.
Right. And overtraining has very real negative effects.
Yeah.
Like mood, you're depressed, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get sick. All of these things are the negative byproducts of non-fully recovered states before you then, get after it again.
Yeah, and I think we've always kind of taken the approach of like, more is more. If we train more, we'll get more. If we work out more times in a week and we train out, harder, then we're going to get better. We're going to get more fit. We're going to get more active because we just think more is more. Where in this case, I think some people start to understand, but there's still kind of the conversation out there is it's more isn't always better, and sometimes less, in fact, is more because we do benefit from all those other things. Like if you get to Thursday, Friday, and you've already tried to jam in a bunch of training sessions and you haven't allowed your body to recover, that workout probably doesn't feel very good.
It doesn't feel good, and it probably is. You're actually going backwards, probably.
And it's not beneficial in the stuff that you're doing in a lot of different ways. So that's, I think, a good quick look at what that stress looks like, what it feels like, what can happen from it. So I just alluded to it, but a lot of times people want to speed up recovery or make recovery better. How can I kickstart it so the next time I walk into train or work, or I'm 100% and I'm ready to go. So before we can speed anything up, I think it's probably worth just defining and talking about what the heck we're talking about in those different types of recovery, because there's a lot of different parts, as we talked about at the very beginning.
Right.
Some of them are passive, some of them are active.
Yep.
Some of them we do without even thinking about, but we might not be doing them, in the exact way that we should.
Well, or intentionally.
Yeah. As we talked a lot about last time, we talked about sleep.
Yep.
Sleep being one of them that you're going to get into, but there are ways that we can improve. So before you dive into them, I think we can all probably, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, say that of all the things on the list, we might not be doing them all great. We might not be nailing them all every single time. But this, I think, is also, like last week, going to help us take a look at them so we can start to kind of really be mindful of the different parts of recovery and not take one or two out because we only think it's sleep or whatever it may be.
Right. It's funny. Recovery is something that a lot of people don't pay much attention to or don't do very well. But it's also probably one of the most sought after results, because once you know that how I feel going into the next day, the next session, the next game is entirely dependent on your mode of recovery, everybody wants it. And there's the reason that there is a massive industry surrounding recovery. There's reasons that you see, those vibration massage guns, you see compression garments, you see recovery nutrition items. It's
cryogenic chambers.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of stuff. out there. So once you are kind of sold on the idea that recovery is something that you should and can focus on and basically affect intentionally, then it's important to then understand, all right, well, what actually goes into recovery and how can I impact some sort of positive change on that process for myself so that when I wake up tomorrow, I feel good, I'm ready to go, and I get the most out of whatever it is that I do.
Right, because I'll let you define them and get in a little bit more detail, but we're going to talk about things like rest, sleep, hydration, nutrition, and those are all things that we just have to do to survive. You sleep because you're tired, you eat because you're hungry, but when we put it in the lens of you do those things to be better prepared and be better recovered and not just think I do it because I need to, it might change how we approach things. But some of the things that you just got into are things that we almost sometimes look to put Band-Aids on. Not to use that as a...
just check the box.
Right. Because I, for one, have one of those little therapy guns and love it.
Yeah.
But I know that it's not just the magic solution for recovery because there are all these other pieces. So we're jumping ahead a little bit. Let's take one step back and just define some of the factors that come into play. I've already kind of rattled a few off, but if you could kind of just help us put them into context, define or just kind of label them, and then let us know, are we talking passive? Are we talking active? Because I think it's good to just kind of get them into those different buckets to start.
Yep. All right. So if you will allow me, I think what we'll do is we'll say that there are kind of 3 avenues through which we can affect proper recovery, in our lives. The first 2 are, as you kind of already alluded to, rest and sleep. That's 1. Okay, when you are just not doing anything physically, there's a lot happening, but you're not doing anything physically. And then, call it nutrition, which you can lump in hydration. What are you putting into your body? We like to think of those label-wise as passive. Now, I want to make it very clear, though, there's a disclaimer to that. When we say passive, we're really, it's semantics, because your sleep and your nutrition habits as it pertains to recovery, 1, should be proactive, right? You should be doing it with intention. It's not something that just happens and it helps you regardless of whether or not you pay attention to it. And secondarily, we're going to talk about the third item, which is, call it more active recovery, things that you do intentionally, you take time and you focus on physically to help spur recovery. They play a role, those active pieces, but the first 2, sleep and nutrition, we're going to spend less time on those 2, but I cannot overstate that if you do not put a lot of attention towards those 2, whatever else you do almost doesn't matter. They are overwhelmingly the biggest pieces to recovery. So, for example, sleep. We're not going to spend a lot of time because we did an entire podcast on sleep. If you aren't taking full advantage of and maximizing your sleep on a daily basis with proper routines, proper total amounts of sleep, sleep hygiene, you are leaving all of the possible potential of recovery on the table. Yep. Sleep is where everything happens. It's where hormone balance is reset, central nervous system is reset. It's where the actual tissue repair happens that you want when you're looking for fitness adaptations. Sleep is massive. Get your 8 to 10 hours minimum. Make sure it's the right type of sleep, etc.
Yeah, and as you said, that was an entire episode's worth. So if anybody hasn't listened to that one, I would check that out because we do go into detail about a lot of those different things. And I know you're going to tap into this one next, but nutrition, just another kind of shameless plug, is, we've spent a lot of time over the last year developing a lot of nutritional resources, and I've gotten to take the front seat to that with our nutrition expert.
Yep.
And I was basically eyes open to a lot of things that I thought I knew, not only just in terms of eating, because get your carbs, proteins, and fats and all these different things, but how it actually starts to affect your body,
right,
both in the short term and long term for things like recovery. So that's another one I think we're only going to scratch the surface of, but you could spend, as we did, basically an entire year's worth of videos and programs and lessons talking about just nutrition as a whole to understand how big of a factor it plays in our daily lives and things like recovery.
Yeah, it's a beast all in and of itself. And another disclaimer here is, while I'll talk about it very briefly and maybe give the high level, I'm not the RD, right? I'm not the registered dietitian on staff. Rebecca is, and what she has produced for a platform is where you're going to want to spend your time if you're interested in maximizing your recovery specific to nutrition. But it's worth noting that I think, in the recovery sense, it's useful to think of nutrition, hydration as the 3 R's: repair, refuel, and replenish. Starting with the first, replenish. I think we all know that fluids are an important part of daily function, life, performance. We know that hydration matters. I think we probably underestimate how important it really is. Dehydration affects all sorts of things like blood flow that's, again, wildly important when you're talking about recovery and everything else. And then, the recovery side of things is anytime you are very physically active, you are losing more water than you normally would, or more fluid. So making sure that you replenish the fluid and electrolyte loss that you incur during any sort of strenuous activity like exercise is very, very important.
Yeah.
On top of that, refuel, we talked about at the beginning, you're going to lose a lot of the energy that you are storing in your blood and liver and everywhere else through glycogen during exercise, because what are you doing? You're using energy, right? Like, that's the entire point. But I think a lot of people think, well, that's what I want. I want to, kind of burn all those calories. Well, you need to refuel your body so that it can do the things that it needs to do to recover from exercise to make you better, whether that's weight loss or performance gain or whatever the case may be. You need to make sure that you are, basically putting the stuff back into your body that is driving literal daily activity, whether that be walking, sitting, talking, breathing. We need to make sure that we replenish. And if you're talking athletics specifically, a lot of kids get this wrong. Like, I'm going to go work out super hard and then I'm, just going to have a protein shake and, not worry about replenishing the fuel that is basically the way that I can go out and train hard, play hard, recover hard.
Yep, for sure.
Speaking of, I should mention repair, right? So protein is very, very important when you get into fitness and training and really any sort of strenuous lifestyle, because you are, as we said, you're breaking down a lot of the, connective tissue, muscle fiber tissue that, is required to perform those activities, and is what you are trying to make real changes within. To make those changes actually happen when you sleep and when you rest, you need to have a positive protein balance within your body. And I'm sure Rebecca's talked about this at times. You don't need to go out and chug a protein shake, but you do need to make sure that in the course of a day, you are hitting the appropriate amounts of protein so that your body has the tools, the building blocks necessary to build your body back after kind of breaking it down through that stress.
Yeah, and what Rebecca does a good job of talking about is that your body doesn't just look at little things and like you talked about earlier, checking the box. It's looking at your entire kind of
day, month,
weeks worth of what are you doing and what are you kind of absorbing within your body. It's not like, oh, you hit your 22 grams of protein today, check the box, don't go over, don't go fast, go. It's all of these little kind of moving parts that
as we talked, the homeostasis, right? Things go up, things go down, and you're always trying to seek balance.
Yep.
So if you are going to ask your body to do something that's going to need a lot of protein to recover from, but you don't put the protein in, you've thrown that balance out of whack.
Yep.
And I think that kind of is a really good way to think about all of, nutrition, what you're putting into your body to account for what you're asking it to do. If you don't, you're not going to be able to kind of reap the benefit of, the exercise or training or competition that you are actually endeavoring to go out and do.
Sure. Great. So that's a good look at sort of those top buckets of information, sleep, nutrition, some of those things you talked about. One that we haven't touched in, and I think this is where we can probably spend some time actually really diving into, is now the more active recovery, looking at things like movement and things along those nature, where people feel as if all right, I can kind of, as we've talked about before, get ahead of the curve, or do some things to like
speed it up.
Or I don't want to use the word proactive because you can be proactive with nutrition and sleep as well, but it's one of those things like, all right, more deliberate, intentional, like I have to dedicate some time to stretch or do a cool down or, find 15 minutes at night to be able to foam roll or whatever it may be. So I just rattled off a bunch of different examples, but what is it that we're talking about really when we look at active recovery, or how do you look at that more active recovery and movement at the larger bucket? And then I think we will really spend some time looking at some of the more specifics within it.
Yeah, and not to be a broken record, but again, we're going to talk about the things that go into what we call active recovery, and it's what a lot of people kind of think of first when it comes to recovery. But if you don't think of the other two as the priority, your sleep and your nutrition, whatever you do here with active recovery is going to be to some degree a moot point. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that none of these are, waving the magic wand and you can erase a bad night's sleep or a poor day of eating or not enough food or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, and I think we all fall victim to it, and I'll be the first to put my hand up as saying like, well, I'm not getting a good night's sleep, but I'm making up for it during my day because I do active recovery. Right. Or, I'm eating like junk, but I'm sleeping well and doing stretching for 15 minutes. Like, we try to kind of like justify
we pull, like you said, we pull levers here and there, and we try to, just minimize the damage.
Right. I love to use my lever example, and that's a good one. But, more so, we're trying to think about moving all of the kind of needles and levers together rather than just kind of yanking one down to bring the other up. So that's a fair point. It's got to be,
just want to make sure it's on the table.
Yep, it's on the table. It's been said. So
yeah, I will answer your question.
Yeah. Now let's kind of go into some of the things and then we'll break them down because I think there are a bunch of different like facets of active recovery, big, small, time intensive, not time intensive, that we can be aware of. And it'll be helpful to get kind of a sense of what those are.
Yep. All right. So to start, as you alluded, we are talking about active recovery, which basically encapsulates all intentional effort intended to speed up the recovery process. We're working to try to balance the equation of stress to recovery with physical action. And this can be done at a lot of different times, right after a workout, aka cool down, post-exercise recovery, recovery training sessions, work that you do outside of the gym at home before bed when you wake up. And it's where you're going to spend some time and focus and a little bit of energy to try to spur recovery kind of in total. We're going to kind of think of it as post-exercise recovery because that's where a lot of people's minds go. But I want to make just the note that post-exercise recovery can be a lot of different things, as I just mentioned. We often think of it as the moment the workout ends, what do I do for the next 5 minutes? That is my recovery. That is a part of the puzzle. And we can talk about the things that we can do, why and when and how long and all those things. But post-exercise could just as easily be that night before bed. Or just imagine, we've all done it. You come in, you're going to have a workout and you're sore from the day before. You don't quite feel your best. So before you even warm up, you spend time rolling out or hopping on a bike. You might think of that, well, that's actually my warm-up. Well, in reality, what you're doing is trying to recover from your previous session so that you're ready for the next. So It's all this post-exercise recovery kind of umbrella is all of that together. And so the things that we're going to talk about from SMR and massage, aka, foam rolling or static stretching or any of these elements, they can be done at any number of times. It's not, so strict that it has to be done at X time or Y time or it only fits here, here, or here.
Yeah, and I think even along the things that people are like, well, I'm just going to go for a cool down walk or run or bike or whatever it may be. Or maybe just like, hey, I'm going to get up in the middle of the day and walk it out and do different things. Like there are a lot of different ways you can do it. And I think the other big thing, just not for my end to be a broken record, is a lot of these things I think we're going to talk about often get tagged to, well, you're an athlete, so you're doing those things.
Right.
Where we're not necessarily saying that. This is for everybody. This is for people that are just looking to feel a little bit better throughout their day, be able to come back the next day. I think a lot of times you see like the foam rollers and the lacrosse balls and the different types of things, and it just looks
athletic performance,
very athletic performance driven. You see people on the sidelines of NFL and NBA. They have their guns, their Theraguns, their different like massage tools and all these different things.
Look at it like this. Those people are so focused on being the best they can possibly be, feeling the best they possibly can, that they go all out on these things, and that's why they're so visible. But if they care about them and they're going to do these things, why wouldn't we also want to do it? If I didn't work out at all today, I sat at my desk all day, and I just want to make sure that tomorrow I feel good and have recovered from the stresses of the day, the same rules apply, right? They're just showing us what matters because they care so much about it because their literal paycheck depends on it.
Yeah.
But it's not exclusive to athletics. It's just recovery in general, as we've said, is the ability to get back to neutral and feel ready to attack the next day. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think we've talked about it enough. Maybe let's just dive into some of the examples so we can kind of get some sense of what it is. So foam rolling, SMR, massage, we'll kind of lump that into one big bucket. But, basically the idea that, you could use some tools or you could use things to almost like target some of your muscles that are sore, or what are we talking about there, and how does it relate to active recovery?
Yeah, it's a good place to start because I think a lot of people picture foam rolling almost first, if not second behind maybe stretching, which we'll hit next, as recovery, especially when it pertains to like cool downs after a workout. And we can kind of put it all together and say that like foam rolling, SMR, which is that self-myofascial release, and massage is all basically the same process or concept in which you are manually manipulating tissue, whether that be connective tissue or muscle tissue, with the intent to increase range of motion, increase skin and muscle temperature, circulation, blood flow, supposed to, reduce neuromuscular excitability, thinking of like, basically recovering in the most extreme sense from like cramping, just basically calming things down. And in theory, all of those things would enhance post-exercise recovery. It's important to note, however, that there is very little, call it conclusive evidence that it really does make a large effect on any of those things to a degree that affects your recovery in the long term. There is, however, no evidence to the contrary. It's not going to make you worse. And there is some evidence that it does have the potential for marginal benefit. And then there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that, for me, spend a year or two trying cool downs with rolling or stretching after a workout, and I know for a fact for myself that I will feel better the next day if I do rolling. So again, you kind of have to understand that there's nothing that says like, if you do this, you will feel better, be better, but there's evidence enough to say that it's probably a worthwhile endeavor to try, and there's, reasons for that. So what happens in the moment when you are foam rolling? So like you finish a workout and you decide to get down and foam roll. Well, first you're trying to increase range of motion about your joints through, increased range of motion of muscles and connective tissue. The theory behind that is that your body is basically, or your muscles and bones are covered with this sleeve of connective tissue called fascia, which actually used to be kind of more of a myth and now more of a, oh yeah, this is very real and it actually has contractile properties and it's actually connected to your nervous system. People realize that it is an important element to movement and performance and everything else. They've also shown, at least that the theory is likely that because it's an organic piece of matter, that when you do strenuous things like daily life or a targeted training session, it can develop basically kind of clumps, adhesions, in which case the muscles, the structures of your body that are supposed to glide over one another get stuck. And what we're trying to do is break up those adhesions and let them move freely about one another. So you are trying to promote recovery by increasing that range of motion and clearing those adhesions. You're also definitely increasing blood flow to the area, and frankly, blood flow to any area that has experienced stress is good, because it's going to bring oxygenated blood and it's going to remove, waste product of any kind. It's also, and this can't be understated, I think this is probably the single greatest selling point in my mind for the inclusion of SMR and then also static stretching that we'll get to next, is it does have a very large neurological component in which it is a literal cool down, because it resets your nervous system. You are actually going to decrease the sensation of pain, release beta endorphins that basically reduce feelings of pain. You're decreasing the release of stress hormones, increasing oxytocin, which is a relaxation hormone. So after the workout, you are going to basically bring yourself back down to neutral, which is really important. You don't want to be in fight or flight mode all day long. It's great for a workout. It's not a bad thing, but you want to kind of get yourself back to neutral, because that's when your body can and will do the recovery that it needs to do to get the gains from that workout session.
Yep.
So, in conclusion, there's really no reason not to do things like foam roll, lax ball, or go get a massage at the end of a workout or after a workout or later or on your off day, because I think at worst, there's a lot of evidence that says the placebo effect is very real and that you will feel better. If you feel better, you're going to be better prepared for your next day, whether that's a training session or anything else. And there's no downside. And I think the religious adherence to anything that is going to help with mobility is a good thing to do. So if that just happens to be how you recover, you might not be better prepared for your next session by a large amount, but you might feel better. And then if you do it every single day, you're going to have better mobility over time anyway, and fix some of the kind of sticky points in your mobility in general. So foam rolling, no real downside. And if you've got the time and you've got the tools, why not?
Yeah, and I think we're going to move on to the next one, but my transition to that as we get into static stretching or any of the others is that, as you mentioned a few times, it's a lot of this, yes, there's some research behind certain things, or people have tried certain things, but a lot of it, like you mentioned, is personal and your experience with it and how you interact with it, whatever it may be. So as we go through these, whether you're a teacher or coach or you're a student, being willing to encourage people to try certain things, but also explore different things, as to your point, we're going through things that aren't necessarily going to hurt anything. It's worth a shot and see how your body reacts to it, how you mentally react to it, if you like it, if you don't like it. Because, I, for one, not a huge foam roller. I just never love grinding out the muscles, whatever else it may be. But we're going to go to static stretching, which is one that I found for my own purposes of recovery, for myself to enjoy, feel better, all of those things. So it to your point, there's kind of those different ins and outs of all of it. So let's move on. We'll go to static stretching. And talk about this one, because I think it's one that we see a lot more often that everybody could possibly give a try.
Sure.
It feels a little bit more like you could give it a go. So what are we talking about with static stretching? And then we'll talk about some of the same ways that you broke down what we do, what it affects, kind of the result of it. So.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody that's at all interested in this in a more significant amount, that we've done an entire podcast on static stretching in its entirety, and a lot of what we'll talk about here and what you might want to know is in that, where we talk at length about all of the facets of static stretching and when, why, how, where, etc. But you're right that it's more of the maybe even more universal as a kind of post-exercise cool-down strategy for recovery that a lot of people use. And let me, right off the bat, I very much, I don't ever mandate it, even to my own athletes, but I encourage it because I have found a lot of success with it. And I will say that overwhelmingly, the ones that try it and do it religiously really, really like, for one reason or another, that piece of the training puzzle. And so it's important, again, to your point, to try things and encourage athletes to try things.
Sure.
As it pertains to static stretching itself, with regards to recovery, it's very similar to foam rolling, the results are very similar. Some of the mechanisms are very similar. Basically, you only need a few minutes to get a feel-good, circulation boosting, flexibility improving, recovery session at the end of a workout via stretching. What are you doing? Well, it's been proven that static stretching actually reduces blood flow while you stretch, in whatever target area you're stretching, and then immediately after, it's increased far more than it had been prior to the stretch. Again, blood flow is very good and important for recovery in general. It is also, perhaps even to a stronger degree, proven to really reset the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system balance, so that you go from fight or flight to rest and digest. And it's the reason that people think of it as a very calming, kind of exercise, not to use the word oddly, but that's probably, again, maybe the biggest selling point I would attach to static stretching for recovery, is that it's going to kind of bring you back down to neutral and let you get about your day with a bit more, calm. And then, the effects of static stretching in the moment and as it pertains to recovery, they're not huge physically, right? Like, you're not going to just eliminate and prevent, muscle soreness, the DOMS. Again, another podcast we went into a lot of depth. And if you're interested in recovery specifically to how do I avoid soreness and how do I treat soreness, that's a whole different, it's a part of recovery, but it's not the whole picture. There's proof that there is some evidence that it might attenuate muscle soreness, might prevent, but only to a very small degree, and it's not really conclusive, but it also isn't going to make things worse. So again, if you balance it's going to make us feel a certain way, maybe reduce sensation of pain, make us feel a bit calmer, and then more importantly, if you do this every single day, we know that there are benefits to flexibility, right? End range stretching is a good practice. And if you're doing that as your recovery modality each and every day, then over time, those benefits add up. And we know that if you stretch, you're not going to immediately get a performance boost. In fact, if you stretch, you're going to have a slightly lower max strength, max power. But if you do it chronically, you actually will see improvements in things like sprint speed and jump height and everything else. So basically, there's no reason not to include static stretching. And if it doesn't affect you negatively by doing it after, and it might help recovery in some small ways, great way to kind of add recovery to, the workout session itself at the end.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like for that one, my follow-up, and we talked about it, as you said, at length, but I think in relation to the recovery piece, where we're looking for those kind of quick fixes, like a lot of times people look for stretching because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm super tight right here, I'm sore, and this is going to like open it up or anything else like that. Is there a difference between, as we've talked about, doing it like those 5 to 10 minutes like right after a workout versus doing it as a completely separate session? Or is it that like a personal preference? Does that make sense?
Yeah, when it comes to foam rolling and stretching, it really doesn't matter when.
Because I think sometimes we lump it into the end of the workout because it's just like, well, I'm here, I'm ready to do it. Where other people would say like, well, separate the two because like you're creating a full another session of activity around like foam rolling or stretching.
Sure, and that's a whole nother discussion. If you're saying we're going to utilize that within a recovery day, which we'll also talk about at some point. But I think maybe even more important is you could leave your workout and then go home and do it, or do it before bed, or do it in the morning when you wake up, and it has the same basic effect. I think it's what we've talked about is it's more about, what is your habit. It's not going to be a fix in the moment necessarily.
Yeah. And the only reason why I ask that is because I don't want people to think one way or the other, well, I have to make a full allotted session to it, or well, I ran out of time, so I'm just not going to do it at all because I lost the moment.
Right. So, which is a balance. Like you might say, like I only have, if you're a coach, you might say I only have 45 minutes with my athletes. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on recovery. That's fine. It doesn't have to happen in the moment. It can happen later. But like, hey, we'd really like you to do this on your own time today, tonight, tomorrow morning, or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And it's still just as valuable. It doesn't. But that being said, it's a really efficient way of guaranteeing that it'll happen every single day if you just say, hey, at the 5 minutes at the end of every workout, this is what we do.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes a part of your routine. And then we've thrown around, speaking of like the 5 minutes at the end of a workout, we've thrown around the term cool down a lot.
Yep.
People use it as just like the what do you do after the intense part of your workout before you leave. In our context for this conversation, sure, foam rolling and static stretching you could call cool down, but what we're talking about when we say cool down as a recovery mechanism is light activity. Think of, getting on a bike for 3, 5, 10, 20 minutes at conversational pace and just moving. This is one of those things that has been a bit more kind of conclusively, I shouldn't even say conclusively, there's just more evidence that would suggest that at the end of a workout, if you spend time just moving, you are going to reap a bit more of the kind of recovery benefit. So we're talking about, they compared to passive recovery. So they did a study, compared to two groups of people, one group just laid down after their workout for however long, the study was done, versus people that hopped on, a bike and pedaled at 40% of their VO2 max, was just very, very, very light. The people that were in cool down, like real active recovery at the end of a workout, were they outperformed the control group in sprint fatigue testing 48 hours after exercise, but they also complained of less soreness 24 and 48 hours after exercise. So we don't actually know necessarily why in its entirety, but there's a lot of evidence that would suggest that if you have the time, going out for a walk, hopping on a bike and just pedaling while you talk to somebody, even hop on your phone and see what you've missed in emails. Like, as long as you're moving and your heart's a little bit above resting, if you spend time doing that, you will actually kind of jumpstart the recovery process.
So in this one, we are kind of talking about right after a workout, right? Mm-hmm. This is something,
this is a yes.
Yeah, you did it. You worked out for 45 minutes or an hour, whatever it may be. This is carving out some time at the end of it to walk, bike, maybe row, maybe do something really light, that is a little bit more like active in that movement.
Right.
Different from like the straight up just, all right, now grab the foam roller because you have 5 extra minutes or whatever it may be.
Right. So effectively cooling down. So going from high intensity and kind of bridging it with lower intensity towards rest is thought to better facilitate a return to like your normal body temperature, dampen nervous system activity, help you sleep later that day. Like, there is some reason to say that that's not a bad thing to do at the end of a workout. The issue is one of time and efficiency within your program, within your logistics, your structure, your day. Some might say, like, look, I only have an hour. That's the way my life works. And I have 10 minutes at the end of the workout. And I don't want to spend 10 minutes just cooling down, because then I'm never going to stretch or do foam rolling. There's nothing to say that I'm going to do that instead. It has a lot of the same effects, maybe not necessarily as proven, maybe not necessarily as effective, but I get the benefits of flexibility and mobility over time that maybe I don't get from just going out for a walk. So, it's all give and take, and it's all, again, relative to your personal situation, your team situation, your class situation, or whatever.
So is it in the idea of this cool down that you're trying not to go from like 100 to 0?
Basically.
You're trying to almost
just
bring yourself back down.
And just like we warm up, right? Like, it would make sense, right? The flip side of that is like, let's bring ourselves back down to neutral somewhat gradually as well. If you had all the time in the world, 10 minutes of a light, walk followed by stretching and foam rolling would be phenomenal. But that's just not necessarily a reality that we all live in. But we talked about, like, stretching and foam rolling you could do later that day. So could a walk, which bridges us into the next piece, which, you can do active recovery sessions that utilize all of this. Like, if you're interested in the positive benefit of a cool down, it can also offer a lot of that benefit if you do it the next day. It's not that you can only do it at the end of a workout, if that makes sense.
So with that, we're going to active recovery, as you just talked about, which I think a lot of people start to try to figure out what consists of an active recovery workout or an active recovery day, both in the understanding of like, all right, well, is it something that I'm really kind of working myself up, but I'm not adding load, I'm not adding intensity, I'm still doing certain types of movements, but I'm taking out others. Active recovery workouts, is it just stretching? Is it long form? Whatever it may be. It's like, it's almost that dedication, like we've talked about, of a actual workout or an actual maybe even sometimes to divorce the word workout, a session. A session, I think, is how I would look at it in terms of saying, like, you're not trying to sell, like, all right, come back in. Today, for example, I'm thinking, all right, I've kind of hammered home a few days. I'm not feeling great. I'm a little sore. I'm a little tired. I haven't worked out yet. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to do an active recovery workout. So talk to me about what are the things to consider in that, because I'm ready for one myself.
Yeah. Active recovery workouts, that's just kind of what people generally refer to them as. But I think your point is important, that it's really a session. We're going to get rid of the idea of workout because it makes it feel like you should be going above and beyond, comfort. But when we're talking recovery, one, we know that you shouldn't just work out with intensity every single day forever, because you're just never going to catch up recovery-wise. So we know that there are days off. Like, that's pretty much accepted by everybody. And nowadays, there's also kind of an accepted level of, we are going to have recovery days. It's not just a thing we're going to add at the end of a workout or at night, or we're going to spend time intentionally recovering. We're going to spend a session together, time and energy planning, and they are very, very useful. And it's because of all of the things we talked about with regards to static stretching, foam rolling, cool down, light aerobic activity. They all have positive benefits that can help spur recovery. And so what we're basically doing is just packaging that all together and saying that instead of going with intensity today here together or by myself in the gym, I am going to make a concerted effort to do all of the things that can help me recover, so that tomorrow I am fully recovered and I can get back into real intense, hard-working type of activity. And it's crucial to understand, like, the role of movement, frankly, is how our bodies were really meant to recover. Contracting muscles are the body's natural mechanical method for flushing out metabolic byproducts, bringing blood to specific areas, and allowing ourselves to begin to repair, replenish, and all those things. But you need to make sure that we're walking the very kind of tricky line of not inciting additional undue stress that's actually going to push us backwards. We want to make sure that we're only doing so much that is beneficial. And your question earlier was, what does that look like? Important to note, we're going to talk maybe what a general active recovery workout might look like. It's all relative. So if you're an Olympian, gearing up for, whatever race in the pool or on the track, and your training is very intense, your active recovery day might be a workout for most people, because it is half of the energy and time and effort that you normally spend. For me and you, my active recovery workout today might be 20 minutes on the bike with foam rolling and stretching.
Yep, no, that's a good point. And not that I was an Olympic swimmer by any stretch of the means, but I remember when I was competitively swimming in college, the workouts that were our active recovery workouts, now as a very
would be a workout
as a very novice, just swim every once in a while for fun and for a different version of fitness, would be a good workout for me. Absolutely. I would get out being like, okay, I feel pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's all because it's relative.
It's all relative.
How much I was swimming versus comparatively. So that's fair, which I think goes to the same point where I would typically think, like, well, should you avoid doing things like squats and push-ups and lunges and things like that in an active recovery workout? But depending on where you're at the higher end of the level in terms of your training, maybe those things do fit within some people's active recovery workouts.
You're bench pressing heavy regularly. Some light body weight pressing via a push-up might be a good mechanism for active recovery. If you are a body weight workout warrior, doing more push-ups on your day off might not be the thing that you want to do.
Sure.
So it's very relative. But I think important to note is that regardless of where you are relatively, planning simple movement sessions between high intensity sessions is a great way to program and optimize your recovery or the recovery of your athletes, your students, or whatever. And we all know this because one of the best ways, and again, soreness is not the marker of recovery necessarily, but it's part of it. We all know one of the best ways to reduce and alleviate soreness is to work out again. Maybe not with crazy intensity, but it is the way that we can kind of get ourselves back to neutral and feel better. So, these types of active recovery sessions are definitely, I would say, a secret weapon for your own personal fitness, because you are still being proactive, daily, but you are not asking your body to do too much, and you are helping it get back to neutral and then beyond neutral in the positive. So what does an active recovery workout look like? Again, all relative. There's no one way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. I like to think of it, again, as just a kind of an amalgamation of the things that we talked about as, our most frequent recovery modalities, which would be, rolling, stretching, light activity. Think of it as a warm-up into a cool-down. So if you basically just cut out the middleman of that intensity piece, elongate the pieces of warm-up and cool-down. So you might do some light activity to get heart rate up and blood flow going. You might do some dynamic mobility to warm up joints. You might do some body weight movement to kind of, engage the muscles and connective tissue to, kind of get them to that just at the line of, work, but not something that's going to put a lot of demand on it. So maybe you do hop on a bike for 10 minutes, do a dynamic warm up, do some light body weight movement. Then we transition back into our cool down already. Now we're going to maybe hop on a bike again for 5 minutes just to kind of cool ourselves down. Then we stretch and foam roll. And that could be 30 minutes, an hour, it could be 90 minutes. It's whatever you have time for, but you're going to work yourself up to the line of kind of just baseline, not going to put a ton of undue stress on the body, and then cool ourselves back down. And the cumulative effect is really going to actually spur recovery rather than ask your body more. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. It could be just hopping on a bike for 30 minutes. It could be that entire session that we just talked about. It could be, again, it could be a full body weight workout that you're just doing with low intensity. It's really dependent on the person and the situation.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a good, I think, place to kind of stop in a way in terms of the things that we've talked about as the options. Where I want to finish is a little bit probably off script of what we planned on doing, but is to sort of think about the application of it to someone. We talked about a lot those active recovery modalities or options or things that you could be doing. We talked about some of the passive things that we're just doing naturally and thinking about all of those different parts. Where I want to go with that though is how much of this should we be thinking about in our given week or our given month? How big of a focus does it deserve within all of the other things? And I know that is a huge question, and I know the answer almost always is depends on the case and the different people about it. But if there was a takeaway or an action item of look at your day or look at your week and see how much you're doing, where can people start to sort of try to apply this into their training or their fitness?
Yeah, and first, my real answer is it's all situational. It's all highly dependent on what you do regularly and when should you switch things off, when should you slow things down, how can you accommodate for recovery. And the only person that can drive that is you or the person that's coaching you daily, right? You might be able to go a certain amount of days in a row and then need recovery, or you might need recovery every day. I think then the more kind of action-oriented or more definitive answer would be just me, Coach Breslin, would say, as it pertains to the cool down and recovery piece, as I would say that whether you put it in at the direct end of every workout or you suggest and encourage yourself or your athletes to do it, it should happen every single day. Period. Do some stretching, do some rolling. It can't hurt, and it can only add positive benefits. So with our guys, I say at the end of every workout, I say, hey, if time allows, take 5 minutes to do some element of static stretching or foam rolling. Then I also always program, whether it be practice, whether it be training, is I never want to do anything with intensity for more than about 3 straight days before I at most do an active recovery session or an off day. And so when you say, like, where should we be looking at this? You should be looking at it every day and week. There should be active recovery days pretty much probably every week, because you're not going to train with intensity 7 days a week, right? And you shouldn't just rely on Saturday and Sunday trying to make up for 5 straight days of crazy intense training. Minimum effective dose, right, is a big buzzword, especially on Strength Coach Twitter, which is, don't think that if you have 5 days with your athletes or 5 days in class that you should be doing something intense all 5 days in a row. Maybe it's 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 2 days off with the encouragement of an active recovery one of those days over the weekend. Maybe you're somebody that says we only train with intensity twice a week, we active recover twice a week, and we have an off day once a week. And I think, again, that's where it becomes all situational. You have to balance what you're asking of them from an intensity standpoint with what you are going to kind of give for recovery. If you don't ask a lot every single day, you can obviously do it more consistently or more regularly or with greater volume. So I don't know that I answered necessarily.
No, that's okay, but I have a follow-up to that, because I think you sparked another question that comes up in my mind and probably other people's minds is, you mentioned off days. An off day, are you completely off? Or can you incorporate that recovery in some form or fashion without doing more damage than good? So the question really is, let's say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, work out hard, train hard, everything else like that. Thursday, am I a couch potato because it's my off day? Or am I better suited to carve out an hour, even though we're not doing a full workout? That's why I tried to separate the word and call it an active recovery session. Are you better suited to do something rather than nothing?
So you asked me an or question. My answer is yes. There is no answer to that question that I can give that's a good blanket answer, because, for example, and if I was just looking at my group of football athletes, those 3 days, if I went 3 straight days, which we almost never do, I might say it's an off day, because not just from a physical standpoint, like, it might be beneficial to have them be with me for a structured active recovery session, but they need to have lives outside of the gym. They would need to want to be in the gym. And so maybe a couch potato day off is what they need. They might not be quite as prepared physically for the next session we do, but they might be more willing to actually do all of the days that we do together. If I was training somebody, again, like a college athlete, Olympic hopeful, whatever, that day is probably going to be some sort of, off days, active recovery, very low intensity, but we're going to be proactive about what we do so that we don't just sit in a weird posture all day and actually get, kind of gunk ourselves up for the next session. So I think it's about kind of looking at your schedule, looking at your audience, and thinking about what makes sense to you. If I'm doing, call it, if I had my druthers with my guys, I'd probably do Monday intensity, Tuesday intensity, Wednesday active recovery, Thursday, Friday intensity, Saturday active recovery, Sunday off.
Yeah, and I think to your point too,
I don't even get that, because Saturday and Sunday I don't have them, so I have to assume that if I encourage them to do things on Wednesdays and Saturdays, they will.
Yeah, and I think to that point, which I was going to get to and I think is a nice way to close, is there are a lot of groups that won't do the recovery, won't do it unless it's kind of incorporated into training. They have to feel it, see it, and do it as a group, or they're not going to do it on their own. And I know in a lot of PE settings or things like that, that's where mastering mobility, or we're going to do a day where we're going to dedicate to it at least for a few weeks or a few months, so that they understand this is what your body feels like. It's just like you introduce them to anything else. It's introducing them to this aspect so that they can understand this is what I'm getting from it.
And they will. So anecdotally, just a quick story, and we've talked about this on a previous podcast, but we started doing, after Friday night games, Saturday morning active recovery. Yes, sleep's important, and nutrition and hydration is important, but I'd bring them in and we would do something like what we just talked about with a structured, very light activity, rolling, stretching, or whatever. And at first it was I got to come in, and I'm probably cutting into some of their sleep because they'd love to sleep till noon, and that's probably just as important or more. But they started to realize very quickly how much better they felt Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday, when it had came time to work out with intensity or practice with intensity, that they started calling, I think they call it like yoga Saturdays, and then they would do breakfast together as a group. Now they do that stuff on their own. We still do it structured, but they will do those things without me telling them to, because they have associated the correlated effect that they felt by being mandated early on. So I think it's important to say that, like, it's not all fake. It's not all, because coach said so. Like, it does have a positive influence if you do it right. And if you do that, like, eventually it becomes somewhat self-perpetuating. You don't always have to do active recovery together as a group. They learn that recovery is an important point. What they can control is sleep, nutrition, and then these active pieces. And they're going to do it on their own because everybody wants to feel better. Like, sometimes it's like, do I want to spend 20 minutes stretching and rolling? Maybe not today. But then the next day, you're like, well, I'm not feeling great, and I have a big day tomorrow. Like, I probably should. Like, we do it. Once you're sold on the result, most people will generally find times to do it on their own.
Yeah, for sure. Well, a fun little kind of way to end the conversation. I think there's some other things we probably could have gotten to,
Sure.
but the stamp I'd like to put on it, like we talked about in the middle of the episode, is especially when we start to think about some of the other things we didn't get to in terms of like fun and fancy ways that you can work towards recover that people sell, as you mentioned, or people try to like produce, or there are some basics we just went over before we could tap into all of those complicated recovery forms that can go a long way without a lot of investment or time, but just being mindful of it and checking in. So anything else you want to add before we wrap up? Or
No, I think I'm good.
That's a first. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, tuning in. If you have questions about recovery or any of these topics sparked your interest, please feel free to reach out. We also tapped into a lot of episodes. I think we mentioned DOMS, we mentioned
Energy systems, static stretching,
a number of different podcasts that have been featured. This is like episode 90, I want to say 92. So go back, find some of those episodes. I'll link them in the blog as well, so you can find those exact episodes that I think are relevant to this larger conversation. And remember, at Platform, it's always in pursuit of better.